Welcome, everyone. Let's learn how to get started with ORCID. Next slide, please, Paolo. To begin, we'll start with some introductions. Your ORCID US community staff are pictured here. Sheila Rabin, the Senior Strategist of Research Infrastructure Programs, Paolo Gahilde, the Strategist for the ORCID US community, and myself, Kayla Ramhit, the Program Assistant for the ORCID US community. Next slide. So I'll go over our agenda for today. We'll start by talking about ORCID, what is ORCID, how it can benefit organizations, and then go into what the ORCID US community is, about membership and the different tools and services that are available to members as part of the ORCID US community. Then we'll get into really how to get started with ORCID. So how to work with internal stakeholders, about the technical aspects of ORCID, and how to promote ORCID at your organization. Then we'll have some information about next steps and how to maintain ORCID adoption at your organization. And lastly, we'll have some time at the end for a Q&A session. So what is ORCID? I do see a raised hand. So go ahead, Lisa, real quick. Oh, was it a mistake? All right. Okay, cool. So what is ORCID? ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. So ORCID is an identifier that is meant to uniquely identify researchers so that they can get credit and attribution for their work, streamline a researcher's digital identity so an organization can save time on administrative tasks, and keep track of a researcher's affiliations and contributions all in one place. ORCID is a nonprofit, community-driven organization that serves the global research community. Next slide. There are three main components that make up ORCID. The ORCID ID, which is the unique persistent identifier that is free of charge to researchers and individuals. The ORCID record, which includes information about the individual from their employment history, education, works, as well as many more things. And the ORCID API, or Application Programming Interface. The ORCID API allows the research community to work collaboratively with ORCID by allowing connections between the ORCID record and member organizations. We'll go into more detail about the ORCID API later in the presentation. Next slide. First, let's talk about the ORCID ID. So an ORCID ID is a 16-digit number that is unique to the individual. It distinguishes researchers from each other and is free for anyone to use. You'll see here our volunteer researcher, Sophia, and her ORCID ID. You'll notice it looks like a link, and that's because it is. The ORCID ID links to an ORCID record. So if you click on this ORCID link, next slide, we're taken to Sophia's ORCID record, which is populated with information similar to what you might see on a CV or a resume. So the ORCID US community has an ORCID workshop for researchers that we put on quarterly each year that goes into more detail, but I'll very briefly mention what you can find in an ORCID record now. So you'll see here that there's a section for different name formations, a biography for her country, and a section for keywords describing her research areas. And very importantly, a section on her employment history. We're going to go through the next slides a little quickly, but if you scroll down in her ORCID record, you'll see that her education and qualifications, next slide, her professional activities such as membership, service, distinction, and invited positions, what funding she's received, research equipment she's used, her works, which include publications she's written, and then lastly, her peer review activity at the very bottom. So now let's talk about the benefits of ORCID. ORCID can distinguish researchers from each other. An ORCID ID persists over time, even if the researcher's name or anything in their life changes. It can bolster a researcher's digital identity, ensure that researchers meet funder, publisher, and reporting requirements, and it can also help save time when filling out forms and reducing administrative burden. So we're going to go over each of these parts in a moment. So next slide. So an ORCID ID can distinguish researchers from each other. In this example of a PubMed abstract, you'll notice here that there are a lot of authors with similar names. It's hard to tell who is who without any additional information to distinguish them from one another. An ORCID ID ensures that the researcher's research outputs and activities are correctly attributed to them. Next slide. So our volunteer researcher, Sophia, for example, has several names that belong to her. But how can we be sure that all of these names refer to the correct Sophia? Next slide. An ORCID ID stays the same and can tie a researcher to their affiliations and activities throughout their career, even if their name changes or they share a name with someone else. In Sophia's ORCID record, all the names she has gone by or goes by are listed, and her works can be correctly attributed to her through her ORCID record and ID. Next slide. So now let's go over how an ORCID ID can also streamline the collection of data for certain workflows. This is useful for organizations to help with evaluation, reporting, and assessment. So all organizations in the research ecosystem can benefit from ORCID. If an organization collects the researcher's ORCID ID, they can use that ID to assess impact, help with research reporting, evaluate a researcher's work, and help with determining promotion and advancement. Next slide. So an ORCID record can also confirm a researcher's affiliations. You'll see here in this ORCID record that the source of this employment record is from the University of Virginia. This demonstrates how an organization can lend credibility to a researcher's record, confirming that the researcher is employed at their organization to make that information more accurate and trustworthy. Next slide. An ORCID record can also help organizations stay connected with their researchers. This helps organizations when assessing for impact, as I mentioned earlier, or for supporting these researchers with their future research and their ongoing careers. Next slide. An ORCID record can also help save time and reduce administrative burden in workflows and research reporting. So a researcher can sign in with their ORCID credentials, import information from their ORCID record to populate applications or progress reports, and organizations can automatically add awards, works, or funding to a researcher's ORCID record so a researcher doesn't have to, making this process more automated to save both the researcher and the organization's time. Next slide. And finally, an ORCID record can help leverage interoperability. An ORCID ID can make connections to support and enrich the cyclical nature of the research ecosystem. The relationships between publishers, funders, employers, and researchers can all benefit from the use and connections made by using ORCID. This is also true of the different systems that each member of the research ecosystem uses. With ORCID, making these connections and using these different systems in conjunction with ORCID can help make processes between funders, publishers, employers, and researchers easier and more trustworthy. Next slide. So we've talked a lot about ORCID and what it can do, how it benefits researchers and organizations, but we're now going to talk about the ORCID US community and how that plays a part for ORCID and for you and your organization. So the ORCID US community is led by Lyrasis in partnership with the Big Ten Academic Alliance, the Greater Western Library Alliance, and the Northeast Research Libraries. It provides a national community of practice for ORCID adoption and integration in the US, maximizing the benefits of ORCID for premium consortium member organizations through dedicated support and a range of other resources. Our goal is to support our member organizations and how they would like to use ORCID or how they are using ORCID to benefit them and their researchers. Next slide. So the ORCID US community is made up of a combination of universities, colleges, research institutes, health and hospital systems, associations and societies, funders, and other research-related groups. Currently, there are more than 200 ORCID US members. Here's a map distribution of our current members across the United States. Members of the ORCID US community benefit from discounted membership fees when they join with us. These fees are a tiered structure based on the total annual budget of your organization. So for more information, you can see up-to-date fee information on our ORCID membership page. ORCID US community members also benefit from premium membership when they join with us. So a premium membership comes with 5 ORCID API keys. We'll go into more detail about the ORCID API later, but members also benefit from having a dedicated support staff who is on hand to help them with their needs. I introduced us earlier at the beginning of the presentation, but that staff is the 3 of us. Next slide. So let's talk about the tools and services that ORCID US community members benefit from. There are several tools that are available for our members. Organizations have access to ORCID's member portal, which gives them administrative control over their ORCID account, lets them access and use the affiliation manager, view and download member and affiliation reports, and manage member information such as contact information. There's also the affiliation manager. This is a tool that allows an organization to write affiliation data to a researcher's ORCID record. This type of data includes employment, education, qualifications, invited positions, distinctions, memberships, and service. Only consortium members have access to the affiliation manager tool. So as a member of the ORCID US community, you would have access to this tool. And we'll go into more detail on the affiliation manager later in the presentation. We also have communication channels for sharing information about events, resources, and allowing our members to learn and communicate with one another. Our discussion forum is for our ORCID US members to share their experiences with ORCID, ask questions, and find resources. We also have a listserv, which is open to anyone, member or non-member, to learn about different events and news or about any resources we are sharing. We also have guides and resources on our website that can help our members with using ORCID at their organization. These guides and resources range from how to do outreach, about how to use your ORCID integration, how to work with stakeholders, how to write and read data from ORCID, and many more things. We also have two other resources for our members, which I'm going to go into more detail now. Next slide. So the ORCID US community has a resource called our ORCID R searches. What this does is we run an R script using ORCID's public API to collect the number of currently affiliated ORCID holders at any organization. This R script collects employment and education data. This resource is mainly for universities and colleges that are members of the ORCID US community to see how many of their faculty, their staff, or their students have an ORCID ID already. This can be used to help with seeing how much ORCID adoption is on your campus. Next slide. We also have another tool, which is our data visualization tool. This resource allows an organization to visualize publication collaboration activity based on public data from researchers, ORCID records, and Crossref DOI publication metadata. You'll see here that we have the script here that pulls the collaboration data and visualizes it in Tableau, not only in charts, but also as an interactive map. There are still improvements that can be made to the script. We'd like to one day, for example, add the ability to search for data site DOIs, but we're working on that. Next slide. We also invite our members to join our coffee chats. These chats are community-led, where our ORCID members can meet up with peers from other member organizations to chat about ORCID and have informal conversations. The ORCID staff don't join these chats. These are meant for our members to speak with one another and give each other guidance, feedback, or just to meet and talk about ORCID with one another. Next slide. On top of all the tools and services we offer, the ORCID US community is open to consultations with our members, meeting virtually one-on-one to answer questions or help talk through issues or problems. We also do several events and presentations, like this one, over the course of the year on different ORCID topics. We have a quarterly ORCID workshop for researchers, which I mentioned earlier. We do several community calls with our members, and we're always open to presenting on topics that our community members are interested in or ask us for. For any questions, you can reach out to the ORCID US community staff by email at orcidus@lyrasis.org. And with that, I will pass it on to Paolo.
Thank you, Kayla. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. So now we're going to talk about how you really can get started with ORCID. Let me just, there we go. So today we're going to talk about these three areas. And if you want to follow along, you can also go to our website and ORCID US, on ORCID US at Lyrasis. You can also get the planning guide, which I believe Sheila and Kayla will be sharing. So you can take a look at that, and that will pretty much kind of guide you through this process as well of getting started. So getting started or implementing ORCID at your organization, we're really going to focus about three things: stakeholder support. The second is technical integration. And the third is outreach and education. All right, so now let's take a look at on stakeholder support. So essentially, this is really about partnering with internal stakeholders at your organization. So one of the things to really kind of really think about as an organization, and also when you are discussing a lot of these things with partners across your organization, could be from a different department, is to really think about what the benefits are for organizations. So the benefits of ORCID for organizations. Caleb, talk about this earlier, and these are just some of this too, to kind of bring this back up. So it's really about reducing administrative burden. So essentially, you are saving time. We're also looking at assessing and measuring impact. So it could be from the funder's standpoint. We're also looking at a consistent name for your organization. So we kind of saw a little bit earlier about the source name for, say, an employment affiliation. It's also about your researchers affiliating with your own organization. And ultimately, it's also about disambiguating names. So if you have what Kayla mentioned earlier about the researchers with pretty much the same last name and initials, that's really ORCID disambiguating. You can disambiguate each one of those using ORCID ID. So one of the things also when you're looking at stakeholder support is to really identify the different stakeholders that you have in your organization. So keep in mind that stakeholders in your organization have different goals when it comes to ORCID. So, for example, if you're at a university or at a college, if your library would be looking at perhaps integrating an institutional repository with ORCID. And the goal there is to really about putting publications, the citations in ORCID, or perhaps tracking publications. Or if you are a funder or an association organization, you may have a publishing department. And in that sense, you may be looking into integrating ORCID with a manuscript submission system. And in this, you want to make sure that, in this kind of integration, you are displaying the author's ORCID ID in the journal, for example. Or you want to make sure that you are including ORCID ID in the DOI metadata. So the different stakeholders have really, if you think about it, have different goals when it comes to ORCID. And these are just kind of ways for you to really think when you are approaching a different department, a different perhaps unit in your organizations to really think about what those goals are for that particular area. And you kind of want to discuss that with them as well. Other things to also keep in mind when it comes to stakeholder support. So there are some other considerations here as well. So really thinking about what works for your own organization. That could be including the context of your organization. So for example, is your organization more of like a do a top-down approach? So for example, say your researchers listens more to say the provost office, or it could be a bottom up approach. So looking at maybe a faculty senate will be more of like a way for your organization to really work on looking into ORCID and making all of those kind of charges that would be important in your organization. So here, for example, if we think about a faculty senate, so more of like a bottom-up approach, is that an example here is we have Rutgers University pretty much working with the faculty senate, and the faculty senate um, essentially have a charge with investigating and recommending a potential adoption of ORCID identifiers. So that's kind of the charge that they've had in 2016. And you can see at the bottom of here that there's a response from the president of the university looking into that, that the charge is important, and that his support, or the president supports this particular investigation into ORCID, and that the organization should join, um, should be an ORCID member. So that's more of like a bottom up approach. Um, Perhaps also another context of your organization, perhaps researchers, awardees, or grantees, if you're a funding agency, is kind of important in that sense. So, what kind of things do they want to see? Perhaps they want to have the funding information in their ORCID record. Or perhaps as a funding agency, your policies have changed and you want to make sure that you are including ORCID IDs in your application process or in your funding life cycle, the grant life cycle. So here, American Heart Association in 2018 started to require ORCID ID in their processes. However, at that time, they were not a member of ORCID yet. So now they've been a member for quite a while now, and they have incorporated the use of ORCID IDs in the grant life cycle. And of course, one of the things also is to create an ORCID implementation team. So you have different support on campus, you approach different departments, units in your organization. So in that sense, you could create an ORCID implementation team to get the different areas in your organization to have some kind of take or some kind of stake into the adoption and implementation of work. And that's again an example here with Rutgers University, where they actually created an implementation team. All right, so now that you've got stakeholder support, let's take a look at the technical aspects of ORCID and the considerations that you have to take. So really looking at the technical integration. So this is about configuring organizational systems with ORCID API. So the first thing to probably really take a look at is what is an API? So the application programming interface that Kayla mentioned earlier. So an API is really a piece here that connects your different systems to ORCID. So for example, you have an IR, so your institutional repository. You have, say, a manuscript submission system. So for example, say OJS, or you may be using ScholarOne. So those kind of things are connecting to ORCID using an API. So there's an exchange of data, a flow of data between ORCID and the different systems. And that's through the use of the API. And what the API does is to really that it's the organizations, if you're a research institution, you're a funder, you're a publisher, you're able to read data from your researchers. And at the same time, if you're using the API to push data to ORCID, you're able to write data to ORCID. So data such as employment, funding information, works or publications, you can push that to ORCID using the API. At a very basic level on how the integration works in ORCID, so an API integration. So this is like a very simple, kind of very generalized way of what an integration looks like. So the first thing is really you'll be able, your researchers is able to connect and create or create an ORCID ID through your system via your system. And then your researchers logs in using their ORCID credentials. And then your researcher will give your organization authorization or permission to access their data. So accessing their data could be reading data from ORCID, writing data to ORCID, or both. Um, and then the last thing is really once that permission has been given, your organization becomes a trusted party in the researcher's ORCID record. And this is how that looks like. This is an example right now what you're seeing from University of Arizona. So you'll have the way for the researchers to connect to the system. So creating or connecting their ORCID ID. And then they would be logged in. They could sign in to ORCID once they click that create and connect button. Once they provided that credentials, they will be presented with the permissions that you're asking as an organization from the researchers. So you're asking to say, update the research activities, for example, or I want to read their data, that sort of thing. And once all of that is done, your organization will become a trusted parties in their ORCID record. And the researchers can see this as part of their information when they go to like the settings side or the admin side of their ORCID record at the top right area of their ORCID record. So now that we kind of get the idea of what an integration looks like and how that kind of really works. So there are different kinds of integrations, different ways that you can integrate with ORCID. So one is looking at a vendor system, for example. So it could be a vendor system or an open source system. You could also be using an ORCID, the ORCID's affiliation manager, which we'll kind of look into a little bit. And then there's also custom integration, which really kind of looking into the way that you want ORCID to work for your organization. All right, so first stop is really looking at a vendor or an open source systems. So you want to identify the systems that you have in your organization. So it could be a grant funding system. It could be an electronic research administration system. So those kind of things you want to take a look at. Some of the systems have a built-in ORCID functionalities. Some you may have to do some custom work on it to have a little bit of workaround. Unfortunately, others may not be able to integrate at all. So that's why you might be able to be looking at a custom integration. And a lot of these things really, once you kind of make this integration, it may also require some integration review from us. If you go into our common systems list for ORCID integration that Kayla just shared, you can actually take a look at the different systems that's available there and see what's the ORCID functions or functionalities that's possible within that system. So that's kind of an example here with additional measures. Um, but if we look at here, these are just some of the systems that an ORCID API works with. So you have InfoEd, for example, Symplectic Elements, Scholar One for manuscripts, and then you also have Proposal Central for grant funding. So these are just some of the systems that you could use an ORCID API with. So now we kind of talk about vendor and open source systems. We can also take a look at a custom integration. A custom integration is really a way for you to, with its word, customize the way you want it to be. All right. So this really kind of caters what you want to accomplish with ORCID at your organization. So in that sense, it does require some additional planning, may require additional staff, development work, time. So you would need to have a developer to be able to really work all of this together. And ultimately, you'll do an integration. Kayla shared the custom integration guide, so take a look at that. And that really kind of gives you an idea, the considerations on how to do a custom integration. And the last thing that you could do to use an ORCID API, member API with, is if you don't have time, for example, or you don't have staff in your organization, you can use ORCID's affiliation manager. These does require it requires one ORCID member API key. And remember, you have 5 member API keys available to you as a member of ORCID. So you could use one of them with Affiliation Manager. And with this is really a built-in system within the ORCID member portal. So it's already available there. There's no development needed. So all you would need is to have data that you want to push to somebody's ORCID record. And those data are really affiliation data. So employment, education, qualifications, invited positions, distinctions, memberships, and service. So affiliation data that you want to send to your researchers, or say if you're an association and you want to recognize people that worked as a committee member or a committee chair, so you can push that to their ORCID record. So those are just some examples of ways that you could push affiliations to somebody's ORCID record. And now it's really the thing about looking at deciding what to do. So this is just kind of helping you guide a little bit. We will share this slide with you so you can take a look at this. A lot of these questions are also available on that ORCID US planning guide, so you can take a look at that too. But this kind of gives you an idea on how you kind of prepare for a technical integration. So the questions about what systems do we have currently in our organization? What are our goals? What data do we want to either read from ORCID, write to ORCID, or both? So those are the things that you want to really consider and think about when you're considering a technical integration with ORCID. So this you can follow along. So for example, you have a vendor system, go ahead and check a common systems list that I showed earlier. You can contact us at orchidus@lyrasis.org if you're not sure and you just want to know more about how that system works potentially with ORCID. And then you can ask yourself whether they have a built-in ORCID functionalities. If they do, that's wonderful. You can go ahead and do a vendor integration using the ORCID member API key. If they don't have ORCID functionalities, you can go ahead and ask yourself, can we do a custom integration with this system? Can we have a workaround? Do we have a staff time? Do we have developers? All of those questions you want to think about and ask yourselves. And then, you want to go ahead and do a custom integration, for example, you can go ahead and do that and kind of get um, those planning together. If there's no other, say for example, you can't really do a custom integration, start thinking about alternatives. And I just mentioned before this slide, I think we talk about affiliation managers. So that's an alternative that you can use because it's already available there, built in the member portal. So highly recommend to take a look at this and also think about the different considerations when it comes to an integration. All right. So now that you've kind of thought about or implemented or um, integrated ORCID with your systems at your organization, we really want to start thinking about outreach and education. So really promoting ORCID at your organization. One thing to keep in mind that outreach is, it's pretty much an ongoing thing. Um, you don't have to have an integration to do an outreach, for example. So you can start it at any time, start it before you have an integration, and then do continue outreach pretty much. So promoting ORCID at your organization. So this is really about spreading the word, making sure that you're raising awareness about ORCID's benefits at your organization. So building that anticipation. You also want to encourage researchers to connect and create their ORCID ID and authorize permission to your system. So essentially, your organization will become a trusted party in their ORCID record. And like I mentioned, this is an ongoing work. So an ongoing recognition and use of ORCID at your organization. All right, so raising awareness. This is an example of a LibGuide from Boston College. And here, it's really information about what is ORCID. So it's providing researchers, faculty information about ORCID, how to register, for example, information about the benefits for researchers. And you also have a contact information for the librarian that's working with this area in this area, a scholarly communication specialist. On the left side, also, you'll see that basics and benefits, kind of the different buttons available or menu. One of them is a provost letter to faculty. So again, we talked earlier about stakeholder support. So if you have those kind of letters, you kind of want to make sure that um, you added that to your promotional materials, for example. So that way, researchers at your organization knows that there's different stakeholder support when it comes to showing the benefits of ORCID to your researchers. This is an example of displaying ORCID ID in a faculty profile. And also, you could pull in the works and publications and display that in the faculty profile. So you're showing the benefits of ORCID to your researchers and to anyone that would be using that you want to make sure that's affiliating or that's making sure that connecting your ORCID ID with your organization. And another thing is that if you are writing data to ORCID, that's a big benefit to show to your researchers. So this kind of makes sure that it's easier for them that you're sending employment information, for example, or say if you're a funder and you want to push funding information to somebody's ORCID record, so they don't have to manually enter it. So you can push that to ORCID, or if you want to push publication to ORCID record. So all of this information is available that can be written or can be pushed to somebody's ORCID record using an ORCID API. And this is showing that benefit to encourage researchers, anyone else to make that connection with your organization. And again, encouraging researchers, right? So you're showing them the benefits and you're encouraging them to make sure that they're connecting. So here's some examples of some of those. This one is from Temple University. So it's a postcard basically laying them down. It's like, hey, if you want to publish in this different kind of journals or this publishing press or organizations, you are going to be asked to have an ORCID ID. So you should have an ORCID ID and making sure that that your ORCID ID is available in the DOI metadata. That it can be added there, or it could be displayed in the with the journal, especially online. So that kind of things really encourages researchers. And the other example is an email that one of the funders is sending to their researchers, to their grantees and awardees, encouraging them to make that connection with their organization. And in here, it's really talking about connect with us so we can so we could push funding information to your ORCID record. So it makes it easier for you because you have that information in your ORCID record and you don't have to enter it yourself. We can do it for you. So that's really a way to encourage researchers to make that connection. All right. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Sheila to talk about what you can do next.
Okay, great. So looking at next steps as you are working with internal stakeholders, you are thinking about integrating the API, maybe you have an integration, you're doing the outreach. What are your next steps? What's kind of the roadmap from the getting started point? So you'll probably want to do some ongoing assessment, checking in regularly to see kind of progress and adoption. And to help with that, ORCID US community members have access to the ORCID member portal, which Kayla talked about earlier. But in the ORCID member portal, you have access to various reports. You'll have a member report, integration reports, and affiliation reports. And you can access those from the tools menu in the member portal, as you see here. But on the next slide, let's take a quick look at what you might see in your member report, for example. The example here is from the Research Triangle Institute, or RTI International. And the member report just gives you an overview of ORCID adoption in general at your organization and across any API integrations that you might have. And so here we can see that RTI has 3 member API integrations. We can see the number of connected users, the total number of unique ORCID IDs. So this is the kind of overarching data that you'll get in your member report. On the next slide, looking further at the member report, you'll see these are just a few examples of the kinds of statistics that you can get in your member report. Things like new users per year. So here we can see that RTI had a spike in 2021 of new users connecting with their systems. You can see the number of ORCID records that have your organization's email domain associated with their ORCID record. And also you can see things like geographic locations where your users are coming from across the globe. And there's a whole member reporting guide that can take you through all of these reports, but this kind of gives you a general idea of the kind of stats that you can be tracking on for assessment as you move forward. On the next slide, we'll look a little bit more at the integration report. So the member report is kind of an aggregate of all of the activity. Your integration report will show you just activity for a single API integration. And so the kinds of things that you can find in that report are things like the number of ORCID IDs that have been connected to your integration each year. If your integration is writing data to ORCID, you'll see the total number of affiliations or other types of data that have been added. And so you can see these examples are still from RTI. They've been adding employment affiliations to ORCID records, and they've written over 6,000 employment affiliations to ORCID, which is wonderful. They've also been writing works information to ORCID, and the report kind of gives you that breakdown. So it looks like they've mostly been writing journal articles, but lots of other kinds of works are getting added to their researchers' ORCID records through their integration as well. And so you have these reports available to keep tabs on the growth over time. And then finally, on the next slide, your affiliation report, which is also available through the member portal. This shows information about individuals, so individual ORCID IDs that have your organization listed as some sort of an affiliation on their ORCID record. So anything from employment to memberships, education, service, all of the different types of affiliations. You'll get kind of an overview of the number of ORCID records that have one or more of these types of affiliations listed with your organization, and you'll also get like a detailed list of all of the ORCID IDs and the types of affiliation that those individuals have listed. So that can also help. And one thing I want to point out about the screenshot here is that the affiliation report, the data here is based on the presence of an organizational identifier on these people's ORCID records. So here, the examples that we're seeing from RTI are a grid ID, a ROAR ID, a Ringgold ID. These are all identifiers for organizations. Grid is not really so much used anymore. It's been replaced essentially by ROAR, which stands for Research Organization Registry. And ROAR is the open, community-driven identifier for research organizations. And that is currently the only identifier that is really supported in ORCID. Ringgold ID is a proprietary identifier that has been used in the past, and so that's why those are included there. So on the next slide, this kind of leads me to my next point in terms of next steps. You know, you're doing all this work to adopt and assess ORCID adoption at your organization. One thing you can think about as a next step is learning more about other types of persistent identifiers or PIDs, because ORCID really works best when other identifiers are included in ORCID metadata and when ORCID IDs are included in the metadata for other identifiers. So for example, ROAR, which we just talked about, is the identifier for organizations. And so having ROAR IDs present in the affiliations on people's ORCID records is really helpful for connecting those individuals with the organizations and disambiguating those organizations. Of course, DOIs, which I think most people are familiar with, especially for publications and other types of outputs, but There are also DOIs for grants now, for example. So learning more about that if your organization is involved in funding workflows. RAID, which stands for Research Activity Identifier. This is a very, very brand new one that's especially designed for projects, research projects. So that's something to keep in mind and look into. And of course, there are lots of other identifiers that aren't listed here. There are discipline-specific PIDs like RRID for biological resources and ISGN for physical samples. So depending on your organization's focus and activities, um, it's a good idea to learn about the other identifiers that work in conjunction with ORCID because it's all really very much an ecosystem. So on the next slide, yeah, just keep in mind that this work is really an iterative process. So, you can always be thinking about expanding your network of internal stakeholders. Maybe you're in the library and you're working with the research office, but as a next step, maybe you want to talk to the sponsored programs or academic departments, something like that. If you already have an API integration, a next step could be thinking about other areas or other systems that you might want to integrate next, or adding functionality to existing integrations, um, like writing data to ORCID if you're not already doing that. And then, of course, as Paolo mentioned, the outreach to researchers is just ongoing. Um, because you always have new researchers coming in. And just keep in mind that ORCID adoption is an ongoing journey. So uh, whether you're just getting started or you're further along or really pushing ahead, there's always a next step that you can take. It doesn't really matter where you are in your journey. You're on the right path, and we're all kind of moving in the same direction. And then finally, I'll wrap up with the next slide, which is just to keep in mind kind of periodic check-ins with your ORCID activity. So if you are an ORCID member, make sure the contacts that we have on file for your organization are up to date. If you get new staff members that are going to be working on ORCID projects, make sure they're up to speed with what your organization is doing. You can stay in the loop with new developments and hearing from other organizations through our discussion forum and listserv, our community calls and other events. Of course, always explore the resources on our website and schedule a call with us. We love to hear from you and we can work with you one-on-one with what might work best in the context of your specific organization. And so with that, I think we're ready to hear any questions that people might have. Let's see. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Okay, looks like we don't have any
No
questions right
questions?
now. But definitely, I want to iterate what Sheila had mentioned to really just contact us at orchid.org. If you have any questions, maybe after this call, something might come up and you're kind of wondering what needs to be done, or just kind of want additional information about ORCID, the ORCID US community, or potentially how you want to do things with technical integrations, all of those things. Definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. Yeah, so we will be sharing the slides as well as if any questions come up via email, we will share that as well. So we'll share the slides as well as the recording link to anyone that registered. If you don't hear from us, just email us and we'll share that to you as well. Yes, we will have the link available too.
We do have a few questions in the chat, Paolo, as well.
Oh, thank you. All right. So one question. My organization is a funder how would ORCID be able to assist us in demonstrating ROI for grants? Sheila is probably you'll be able to answer this best.
Yeah, so we actually have another kind of recording that speaks specifically to funders and the benefits of ORCID for funders. And essentially all of the things that we talked about today in terms of using the ORCID API in particular. So as a funder, um, breaking it down very simply, if you are using the API to get your researchers ORCID IDs either during the funding application process or after you've decided who you're giving funding out to, having the ORCID IDs for your individuals is kind of the first step, because then you know exactly who the researchers are that you're working with. You can kind of streamline application and reporting processes by allowing people to import data from their ORCID record. Um, and then you can write funding information to your researchers' ORCID records. Essentially, what you're doing with this ORCID connection as a funder is you are establishing kind of a verified connection with your researchers. From there, funders can essentially get more information from researchers even after the award has ended. So that can, through their ORCID data, so that can help you get an idea of what your researchers have gone on to do after they've received funding from you. So it can help with reporting and return on investment in that regard. But we'll make sure to include the link to the funder video, which I think is a better, more targeted explanation. Um, but yes, getting your systems integrated with ORCID and getting your researchers ORCID IDs kind of lays that foundation for then being able to get more information about the activities of your researchers. And that can help, you know, uh, with demonstrating that return on investment. I'm seeing a few other questions. One, are there free APIs from ORCID without being an institutional member? There is ORCID has a public API. Um, the difference between that public API and the member API is that you can only get access to the public API through an individual person's ORCID record. So anyone who has an ORCID record has access to developer tools where you can get an API key that will allow you to read public data from ORCID records. So it doesn't get you access to any data that's set to trusted parties only. And you can't write data to ORCID using the public API. So it's possible to use that public API. Just note that the API key is going to be tied to an individual person's ORCID record instead of tied to the organization. And so for kind of sustainability purposes and, the fact that an individual whose API key you might be using might leave the organization, and then what do you do? It is recommended for organizations to use the member API, because then it doesn't matter whether staff come and go, the organization is already set up with that account. But it is a possibility to use the public API. And then the membership, is membership a paid annual subscription? Yes. Um, it is. So you can become an ORCID member directly with ORCID. However, if your organization is a nonprofit located in the United States, it's actually a better route to join through the ORCID US Community Consortium, because the fees are much lower, and there's the benefit of all of the other organizations that are involved. We have kind of a community of practice, and you get like dedicated support for everything that you need related to ORCID.
And there's another question here, Sheila.
Okay.
It says, can ORCID be used as an institutional repository?
I would say it can't be used as an institutional repository, but it can be used within an institutional repository. So you could have an ORCID integration with an institutional repository depending on what software you're using. Um, and that way you could have your author's ORCID IDs present in your repository, and you could also write works that are in the repository to your researcher's ORCID records. That helps.
Okay. All right. I don't think we have any other questions coming in. Um, we will definitely add these questions and agenda notes that we will put together and share with you all, including the recording link as well as the slides that we used today. Um, Darling, we're almost at the top of the hour. So if you have any other questions, again, feel free to email us at orchidus@lyrasis.org. Um, so anything related to Orchid, feel free to do that. Okay, any last minute things you want to share, Sheila?
No, I think that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And definitely reach out and contact us if you have more questions and you're thinking about your organization specifically. We're more than happy to work with you one-on-one to see what the possibilities could be and the best route for you to go. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you all.